We'll wait for that plane. I've just finished Convenience Store Woman and I managed to read it in one sitting because it's so short. This follows Kiko, a 36-year-old woman who's been working at a convenience store for 18 years and it's become her whole purpose. She was made to be a worker. She's also neurodivergent, so she finds it really difficult to be in regular society and she mimics a lot of what she sees around her. It's quite dark in places with her true thoughts, but it doesn't really touch on that part of her too deeply or with any real analysis. She's obsessed with everything going right in the convenience store, but also she wants to come off as a well-adjusted person to her friends and family, and so she gets into a relationship with a man who's fired from the convenience store because he's a pervert. Not the best choice, but it's kind of a symbiotic relationship where it makes her look less weird and it gives him a place to stay so that he's like also not plagued by society. So they make a convenient pair, as it were, until he realizes that really she does only care about the convenience store. This was a short and interesting narrative and I liked the voice, and the story was like just compact and simplistic. It says haunting, dark and often hilarious, and I don't know if I would give that same review for it. I liked it, but I don't think I'm going to be thinking about it much after I put it down. Oh my gosh, it's done. I've done it. I finished reading Daisy Jones and the Six by Taylor Jenkins Reid. I have had this on my desk or my windowsill for, I kid you not, 8 months. And I honestly don't know what possessed me to just keep going with it rather than just say, you know what, I'm gonna DNF. I think because Maddie enjoyed it so much and I really just wanted to see like what was the hype. I'm gonna go ahead and say I didn't really understand the hype of this. Like, I think I got caught at like page 200 or so and then about there, so I think I split it into thirds that I read it in, and the first is just so repetitive with like the Daisy's great, Billy's great, they should be together, they were an unstoppable force, and all the characters in the background. And then in the final third it decides to pick up some plot in terms of who the narrator is and why the story is being told in the first place. You've probably all heard about this book already, so I won't waste time going on about it. I just wanted to say I have finished it. It's only a 380-page book, and it took me that long. Yeah. Today was also the first day of muster, so I managed to somehow finish it through post-concert depression, which is an even bigger feat. More BCS tomorrow, thank goodness. And today I also bought this JE card, which is like my dream photo card. So let's just fingers crossed that it gets to me okay. After a particularly long day at work, I decided the one thing I needed was to be close to lots of beautiful books. So I headed over to Waterstones to have a browse, which was very indulgent because I wasn't actually going to buy anything. I just wanted to see the displays and add some more things to my TBR. I found Breasts and Eggs, which I have on reservation from the library and will pick up later this month. They also had the paperback of Summer by Ali Smith, and I really love this cover style. I come away adding too many things to my TBR. It's a serious problem. I end up writing down any titles I think I'm going to be interested in, and then I immediately check my library's catalogue and put a reservation for any of the ones that I desperately like. I also came across Heartstopper and reminded myself how beautiful the physical editions are. It was so amazing to see all 4 of them together. It definitely made me yearn to own them one day. It's now July and I managed to read a total of 17 books in June, which is unbelievable considering I only read something like 25 in total last year. I couldn't be happier with my reading progress this year, and it's all down to audiobooks, and I've listened to a lot more of those this month. So let's discuss them. In my last video I was raving about Pachinko by Min-Jin Lee, and after that I listened to Becoming by Michelle Obama. I don't know how to really describe this book other than it was like absolutely lovely. I really enjoyed Michelle's insight, her life story is incredible, and all of the work she was doing for young women. I definitely learned a lot about her and the Obama family, and also what it's like to be in the White House. I really enjoyed towards the end where they were talking about how they sort of broke out of the rules a little bit more and what parts of normalcy they could steal back. After that I listened to The Phone Box at the Edge of the World by Laura May Messina. This is a novel translated from Italian, and it follows one woman's journey to the end of the world where there's a telephone box on a windy hill in Japan, and it's meant to connect you with loved ones who have passed away. So it's a very sentimental, very sacred place to go. And it borders that line between fiction and non-fiction, as it is inspired by true events. So the ending gets a little bit didactic of, don't try and find this place unless it's going to be really meaningful to you. They don't want it to become a tourist attraction. So it connects a woman who's lost a child with a man who's lost a child and their shared grief. I have to admit that audio is probably not the best way to read this story, just because the chapters are so varied. Like, you have narrative sections, but then you also have lists and just dialogue as if it's in a transcript. Slightly more non-conventional elements that don't really translate very well to listening. I found that sometimes I couldn't decipher where we'd gone out of one thing and into the next, and I'm sure seeing it on the page would eliminate those kinds of things. So maybe if you are listening to it on audio, it would be a good idea to follow along with the text too. Whilst it was an emotional story, it didn't resonate with me in any particularly special way, so I just gave it a middling rating. After that, I read one of the best books that I've read this year, and that's Summerwater by Sarah Moss. This follows a resort in Scotland and the 14 or so people through mixed different families that are staying there over this one day. The events from the morning to the evening, and it becomes increasingly more unsettling, and you get pretty much everyone's perspective, and the voices are very strong and distinct, and I thought the narrator did an excellent job of differentiating between them. I never felt that I got lost. This diverse group of characters is all trying to get something different out of their holiday break. You have a couple struggling to connect intimately. You have a retired couple reminiscing, a woman who's running in the morning. There's some parts that really feel like Motherland, the British sitcom. Within the small families, a teenage boy. Just these little vignettes, these snapshots of these characters' lives. They're all muddled together in this like really well-woven tapestry of life. It's also a post-Brexit novel, so it's dealing with xenophobia and all anxieties related to that in a very tumultuous way. This rainy Scottish day comes to a true crescendo that is well worth reading. I was so enthralled by this story. It's exciting. I didn't want to put it down, and I found something interesting about all of the different perspectives. I gave this one 4 stars because it basically ticked all of my boxes. This is a book I've also been wanting to read for a really long time, and it's only recently come out in paperback, and if that isn't reason to pick it up now, I don't know what is. As soon as I finished reading Summerwater, I was like, right, what else has Sarah Moss done? So I looked to see what other audiobooks they had of her works, and I came across Ghostwall. This story I enjoyed even more than Summerwater, which I didn't think was going to be possible. So this is one of my favourite books of the year too, and has definitely solidified Sarah Moss as an auto-read author for me. I'm going to try and read the rest of her books. I think Tidal Zone is another one that I have on loan now, and I can't wait to get to. And you might recognise this cover because I definitely did. Anyway, Ghostwall follows a family of 3 where the dad is obsessed with Iron Age living. He takes his wife and his daughter on this excursion where they're going to live authentically as if they're from the Iron Age, and it ends up being a collaborative effort with a group of university students and their professor who are doing archaeology and are also doing this sort of extended roleplay. But maybe it's not just a roleplay after all. It's told through the daughter Sylvie's perspective, and the first chapter is describing her being pitched on a sort of sacrificial bonfire ready to go into the bog, which was a celebrated ritual site as it preserved all manners of things. We start in media res and then it pulled backwards building up to this point. So you know it's going to be high tension building up to that, but I honestly forgot that it was even coming the more I was reading and flowing through the story. So it's Sylvie coming to this realization that maybe her dad's intentions aren't great. Trigger warnings for abuse, both mental and physical. Throughout the novel, Sylvie is coming to realizations about her father. She's definitely been conditioned to think that this is right, and it's through these university students, particularly one older girl who she kind of hero worships maybe a little bit, that is able to see things clearly through new eyes. Again, this is a really short book. It's super atmospheric and the voice is really, really strong. Definitely one of the best written voices I've ever read. The story balances this realistic and mythical quality really well. It also heavily draws on the landscape of Northumberland, and the audiobook was perfect for this as the narrator was from the area, so it just added this extra textual layer. I could see myself rereading this one because it was so entertaining. It felt like straight out of a BBC drama, How this hasn't been adapted yet, I don't know, because I would be desperate to watch something like this. So yes, Summerwater and Ghost Wall, it's 2 for 2 so far with my reading of Sarah Moss, and I hope her other works live up to these as well. Then I read The Vegetarian by Han Kang, and this is a story in 3 parts, and they each revolve around one woman. So the first part is told through her husband, the second by her brother-in-law, and the third by her sister. And I will be spoiling this book to talk about it, so it's safe when this picture disappears. The novel starts with Young Hee deciding that she's going to become a vegetarian after having a very visceral dream. I don't think we get to see this dream in full from what I can remember. We do have some little snapshots of Young Hee's voice, but otherwise it's just from her family's perspective. Her husband is absolute garbage personified. He thinks that she's a completely unremarkable person and then is faced with this bold decision that she makes, and he just can't handle that she has this personality now and that she's decisive and unrelenting. He takes her back to her family, who is also like absolutely shocked by the news that she's going to be a vegetarian. And I think it's pretty clear that vegetarianism is an allegory for mental health issues too, particularly in the second book where it ends with her being taken away in a straitjacket, and the third part where she is hospitalized. Because she's no longer nourishing her body, obviously she starts to wither away, and the more she rejects meat, the more she just wants to embrace sunlight. And I think you can easily see like the progression of that. Like I wasn't surprised by that at all. The ending is very ambiguous. It's like, did she become a tree or not? The second part, I would say, is the one that I was like most enthralled by, potentially because it was so weird. Like in comparison to Young Hee's husband, who like doesn't think she's interesting at all, her brother-in-law is obsessed with her. He wants to do like a whole art piece with her body, so he's like painting flowers and then trying to get her to comply with sexual acts, and she's kind of going along with it, and the whole thing is just like really uncomfortable and very weird and surreal in my mind. Then I read Sweet Bean Paste by Durian Sakagawa, and this was just a delightful read. I wanted to read it mostly because it was a reversal of an older man being like a mentor to a young woman. This time is a young man who has like an elderly woman that he's having this like friendship mentor relationship with. It's set in a confectionery store, and our main character who works there is sort of bored with his like run-of-the-mill life, but he's stuck there as he's paying off loans to the proprietor. And one day an old lady answers a job advert, and he's reluctant to give it to her because she has Hansen's disease, has mangled her hands. He doesn't think that customers will want to be there if she's there. Still, he finds compassion and hires her, and then learns all manner of things about life and confectionery. The third person in the cover is a young student who visits the shop often and also has a close relationship with the old lady. It's a story about discrimination and friendship all at once. It moves pretty quickly between the seasons. I enjoyed it well enough, but I think I would have liked it more if I'd read it in fewer sittings. I did really spread this one out over like 2 or so weeks, and considering it is so short, that didn't make any sense. So I was reading it in so small chunks that I never could really sit in the emotions of it for very long, but I still thought it was cute and enjoyable, so a good read. The next book I have to talk about is Marilyn and Me by Jimin Lee. This is the story of a translator of Marilyn Monroe when she was in Korea visiting the soldiers there. It's about translators and spies and affairs gone wrong, sort of Titanic vibes in the way that it's searching for lost family. Our main character is really grief-ridden. I would say that it was not the book I was expecting at all based on the blurb. Infidelity is definitely not something I'm excited to read about ever, so it came as a little bit of a surprise. And we didn't really focus on the relationship that the translator had with Marilyn all that much. I suppose it was just meant to give you this juxtaposition, this contrast between glamorous Marilyn Monroe and the translator, and how their lives were so different, but also similar in some ways when it came to their relationships. I did have a physical book of this from the library, but I ended up listening to an audiobook. I feel like if I was reading this physically rather than listening to an audiobook, I may even have DNF'd it. Yeah, that was kind of sad because I was on such a like good book streak. And the final book I have to talk about is Pine by Francine Toon, and I've seen a few people talking about this on BookTube with mixed like high and low expectations. I went in knowing nothing and I really didn't like it. It was so slow paced. I don't understand how it's got like a thriller genre title. It's about a man and his daughter and how they've lost their wife/mother because she's disappeared, and then it's sort of like a copycat sort of thing happens to another young girl in the community, but not until way, way, way into the novel. We also have to deal with some like supernatural elements where the young girl's seeing a ghost, which I guess she then starts to clue together is the ghost of her mother. And apart from one thrilling, heart-pounding scene towards the very, very, very end, and I say very end, I found this just so dull, and I only continued to listen to it because I didn't have anything else to choose from. To my absolute delight, yes, Jay's card did arrive. Look how cute it is! I've put us in matching stripes today. Even the back of the card is absolutely gorgeous, so I am overwhelmed that this is being added to my collection. It is absolutely swelteringly hot in the UK right now. We're having a heat wave, so I'm trying not to melt and reading myself into distraction. I just have to talk about what I'm reading, otherwise I will have read like 5 books again since picking up the camera. So currently I am reading Breasts and Eggs by Miko Kawakami, and I'm really, really loving it. This is a book I had on reserve from the library and I've been waiting for it for a long time. So I'm so pleased that I'm enjoying it as much as I am, because it just makes that wait all the more worth it. The beautiful June is holding my place for me and I'm at 260. So a good chunk of the way through the second part. Part 1 is the story of 3 women. We have our main character Natsuko, who's the narrator, and her sister as well as her sister's daughter. Part 1 revolves around her sister's obsession with breast implants and trying to find the best place for them. That's like the top layer. Then we have Natsuko going over her like childhood a little bit more and interrogating her feelings towards that and the loss of her mother and her grandmother. The youngest has just started her period and she's then coming to these like conclusions about womanhood and the burden of menstruation. She's also not speaking to her mother, so you've got this like tense silence permeating the whole thing as both of the older women just try and communicate with her the best that they can. You also get some of Midoriko's journal entries, so you do hear her voice in that way. Part 1 was released as a short story before the publication of this novel, so it feels like a whole. It finishes, you could easily just read part 1 and be like, yeah, that's it if you're done. It comes to an incredible breaking point literally between all 3 of the characters, and I just really liked that story. It was reflective and poignant and really powerful too, so I loved that. And I heard some not so great things about part 2 because of the way it's longer and more meandering, and we only focus on obviously Natsuko, our main character, so you're missing that family dynamic which may have brought a lot of original readers to the story. But I am really, really enjoying the second part, maybe even more than the first, I would go as far as to say. So Natsuko, in the 8 years in between part 1 and part 2, has become a writer, and she's published a novel several years ago and is kind of like building towards her second one, but she's working on it but not really working on it. Her focus at the moment is mostly with IVF. Where her sister was researching breast implants in part 1, she is researching sperm banks and the idea of being a single mother. She has lots of money from her book sales to support herself, so it's not that question that she's wondering about, but it's got like other ethical questions, and she goes to symposiums and hears like different takes on sperm donation. It's definitely like a quieter story. Like you have a lot of scenes with friends she had from her work and her editor, and then another writer that she befriends too. It kind of takes you through the seasons as well as she ruminates on this decision and what she's going to do. As I said, I've still got like just under 200 pages left to go, so she's not made a decision yet. So far, I'm really delighted that I picked this one up, so I couldn't recommend it more, but we'll see what I make of the ending. And the other book that I've picked up is Big Summer by Jennifer Weiner. Because it was so hot outside and this literally has one of those little sticker things that says a perfect beach read, I was like, I'm just gonna simulate that I'm somewhere lovely rather than just in my back garden. I'm under 50 pages through, so not that far at all, but I am very intrigued as to how this is gonna go. Like, the prologue follows a completely different woman to Chapter 1. It starts with a woman who's just had a son and is going to raise him as a single mother, and she's moved out away from her family, so she's completely starting afresh and she's just super content with her life. And then we flash forward a few years and follow Daphne, who is a plus size fashion blogger who has just accepted like a partnership with a clothes designer and has told this designer that this is a great time because she's about to go to a famous friend's wedding. The rest I know is only from the blurb, so it's got this sort of toxic friendship reunited. We'll see how that goes. This author is the author of In Her Shoes, which I haven't read, but I really love the film. It's one of my mum's favourites too. If it turns out that I like this one, I'll go to her backlist because she has been a prolific writer. I'm now 300 pages through Breasts and Eggs, and I'm enjoying it just as much as I was in the beginning. I'm taking it at a slightly slower pace, I think, just because it it is easy to pick up and put down because it's not like the plot is really the thing driving it forward, it's the characters and their decisions. Natsuki has met with a guy called Aizawa a couple of times and they're discussing her decision to have a sperm donor. They swap life stories and he's a doctor, so he's talking about previous patients that he's had and the ones that she reminds him of. I really enjoy how she expresses wanting a child, not like the physical want to be pregnant or to have a kid of her own, but more that she just wants to meet whoever that child may be. I'm also going to read into Natsuko as being on the Aro-Ace spectrum. She talks about her previous relationship and how she hated sex and how she does not have any desire to have it ever again, and she also intends on staying single forever. So if that isn't sex repulsed ace behavior, I don't know what is. And I think that gives it just that extra layer of resonance for me, because the conversation of having children as a single parent, where that is your intention, is something I feel you don't read about often. I still don't know what conclusions she's going to come to for her own situation, so who knows whether she'll go ahead with it. We've got 100 pages left to find out. If I go here, you can see the little bit of blue where I've taken my boxes down and I couldn't be bothered to move my wardrobe when I painted my room, so so I just finished this and I loved it. I think I'm going to give it 5 stars because even though there were parts that I found slow, I don't think I ever lost interest even when I'd put the book down for periods of time. And I also think it's going to be one of those stories that I just continue to think about for many years to come. So that is why it gets 5 stars from me. I'm also going to be spoiling the ending in order to talk about it, so if you haven't read it yet, just know that it comes with a glowing review from me and I'm about to talk about the ending. So Natsuko meets with the guy that she's been communicating with about having his sperm donated, and he's just a total creep, like definite bad vibes. She just gets out of there, and then that leads her to question whether or not this is something she wants to do. She's going to have to take a bigger stretch to get somewhere. She's also having this relationship with Aizawa and she doesn't know what it really means to her. The idea of intimacy is still off-putting, but they clearly have something there. The problem is Aizawa is in a relationship with another woman who she knows, and so she gets to know this woman on a more personal level and they share life stories. This woman really talks to her about the point of having a baby, like really pushes for her motivation for why she wants a child, and kind of says like, well, desire is good enough. You have to think of the implications of what you're going to do for this child and the life that it will live. Like, you can't just expect for it to be happy and turn out well. My favourite characters were Rika and Sengawa. Rika is a fellow author who she bonds with. Rika is a single parent of a young daughter too, and Sengawa is her literary agent, I suppose, like her editor for the book, although they are looking at the pages, they're not really working together just yet. I really adored the friendship that these women had, and I'm really happy that that kind of like the last third of the book really focused on them and their dynamic and the insights they could give each other and how much they cared for one another, which is in total stark contrast to the beginning of part 2, where Natsuko is having a meal with friends that she knew from a previous job and it's so vapid. I adored Rika's candor. She just told it exactly how it was, and she didn't hold back anything. She's like a dream friend where she's happy to share anecdotes from her personal life and give advice, and you always know that it's coming from like a good place. Despite what I was saying about these 3 women's friendship being like the true heart of the final third of part 2, it absolutely devastates them when Sengawa dies and kind of goes with no mention really to the women. Like, she doesn't say that she's sick. It's such a surprise and they can't go to the funeral because it's just family only. And this whole weird blasé nature is another contrast to the way that she's like really thinking about birth. Like, the whole novel is kind of like about birth and death. The novel that Natsuko has written is also kind of about regeneration. So I liked seeing those themes like from Natsuko's life be reflected in her current story as well as her fiction. So it ends with Aizawa having broken it off with Yumiko as they want different things. So he admits his feelings to Natsuko and she's overwhelmed by them, so it takes like a few months of distance between them, but they come together and ultimately decide that having a child together would be the best thing. So everyone gets what they want. Like, Natsuko is able to have a child and it's with someone she knows and is vetted and cares for her. But even though like they had this sort of like little bit of a romance, or there are at least romantic vibes, I loved how she still was like, I'm still doing this on my own. Like, I still don't see him as part of my future. There was something so empowering about that. They decided that he can have a role in the child's life when they're older if the child wants that, but it's not something they're just going to assume. Overall, I think the ending was perfect for the reflections that this novel had. I don't have any problems with it as an ending, because at one point I wasn't sure whether I actually wanted her to go through with it, especially after her conversations both with Yumiko and with Rika. But she knew what she wanted and she went for it. I'm sad that the copy I have is from the library because I definitely would have been tabbing scenes, so I'm going to endeavour to buy this for myself very soon.